How are things going this year, and kind of where's the state of the syrups?
Well, sure. I guess we'll start with the 2024 crop is kind of in, and we understand what it was. Here in the Midwest, I'm from Wisconsin. We had kind of a slightly below average crop. Most producers in our area are kind of reporting a crop that's somewhere between 60 and 80% of a crop. Some did a little better. Not very many did worse. I think our state probably averaged 75, 80% as a whole.
Nice.
But out east, where most of the syrup is made, especially Canada, where Quebec makes 70% of the world's supply, they had an above average crop. So there's plenty of syrup around, which is good because we just came off from a couple of short years. And so the excess that's been available to us was dwindling quickly. So we needed a kind of a good crop to get things back on track. And so feeling better about that now too. I'm Steve Anderson from Anderson Maple Syrup. Our company was founded in 1928. We're located in Cumberland, Wisconsin, and we package and sell pure maple syrup across the United States.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about. So you said the business was founded 1920.
28. Yep.
Excellent. Talk to me about the beginnings of that and kind of the evolution to you today. And was it family or was it acquisitions, and kind of how did the business evolve?
Sure. It was my grandfather. Actually, when my dad was born in 1928, and that was the year that my parents bought the place that my grandparents bought the place that we're currently on, and they moved here. He had grown up just a little ways down the road, but when they got married, they had moved away to find work, and then were kind of coming home to raise their family. And the property that we're on is actually next door to the property that my grandfather grew up on. It started out as more of a, if you want maple syrup, you've got to make it yourself. So, and then they started trading with neighbors and so forth. And then as my dad was old enough to help, they started really growing the business and expanding. A lot of delivering. We were driving all over the place to make deliveries to stores and so forth. And probably our break has to do with my grandparents when they lived in the Twin Cities metro area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, just before my dad was born. And my mom worked as a home cleaner. She cleaned people's houses. One of the houses she cleaned was owned by the family that later became the Lunds and Byerly's grocery store chain, which is a very high-end chain here in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And so at the beginning, that was our biggest account. They took almost everything we could make in a year and expanded from there. And over the years, we've added more salespeople and brokerage firms and things like that to help expand. And now we're, I don't know the exact numbers, somewhere around 10,000 grocery stores across the U.S. And
wow,
then we also
that's awesome.
service a lot of bulk type people that use it as ingredients.
So is it in the food service area or retail where you guys are mostly across the country?
Mostly it's retail.
Nice.
We do sell food service across the country, but our food service type business is more centrally located around the Midwest.
Right.
We have some accounts that are further away, but the majority of them are close.
And how do you guys, as far as distribution, are you linked up with distribution systems, or are you going direct to your customers?
So for the most part, we're dealing, I'll use Kroger for an example. They have their own warehousing, so we sell to the Kroger warehouse and they distribute it to their stores. Most of our business is done that way through retail. We go direct to the big retailers, and they have their own system in place. We do have some connections and some business that we do with smaller. I guess I wouldn't call them smaller. UNFI is a good example. They don't own very many stores anymore. They used to own a lot of stores, but now they're primarily just a distribution company. So they manage a couple thousand probably stores for us through the UNFI, what used to be called Super Value system.
That's awesome. And how do you, let's talk a little bit about, I know a lot of people who love maple syrup, and luckily for you, my family is in the business. It was in the business. He recently retired, and then a Canadian company bought the business. So my family property is in Western Pennsylvania, and they used our property to pull out the raw materials and stuff like that from the trees. Walk through for somebody who's listening today, especially we have a decent amount of 25 to 35-year-olds. Kind of tell everybody like how maple syrup is made. And I don't think a lot of people realize how it's done. And then also like to the point where if you drive by my house during harvest, by our house out in Western Pennsylvania, you just drive by and on the turnpike, you can just see hoses going down the sides of the mountains. So let's talk a little bit about what that means and tell people it's not just sugar and water mixed together in a lab somewhere.
Yeah, it's sugar and water mixed in a tree somewhere.
There you go. There you go.
It is very weather dependent, just kind of like all farming. This year was an abnormally long season. We had almost a full 2 months of production, even though you don't make syrup every day. It was still long. That's an abnormally long season, 2 months, and it's in the spring of the year. You will hear rumor of people making syrup in the fall. It can be done then, but there's not very much made in the fall. It has to do with the tree coming to life. So there is sap flowing through the maple tree all of the time, all year long. But this time of year, the chemistry of that sap is different. If you tried to make maple syrup out of what's in the tree right now, for one, it wouldn't come out like it does in the spring because we don't have the temperature changes. I've had some people have tried to make it almost taste like turpentine. There's nothing sweet about it. There's nothing nice about it. It just is awful. I wouldn't put it on anything. I don't think you could even cook with it. Nobody's ever tried using it for anything. It just has different chemistry than it would the rest of the year. But the real basics of it are, we want those freezing nights. We like it to freeze, get down in the teens at night, and we like it to be up in the 40s during the daytime. And this kind of starts, the freezing creates pressure in the tree. The waters freeze and expand. And then when it warms up in the daytime, now there's more pressure inside the tree because of that frozen sap. And so it forces out through the tap hole. Buckets hanging on it, that'll run for a day. Tubing that's been put in the woods now with a vacuum on it, they make that 1 day freeze thaw cycle might run for 2 days. It doesn't make the tree run without the freeze thaw cycle, but what it does is it takes what could be an okay run and turns it into a good run. Turns a good run into a great run. So we're getting more production per tap because of it. We're not causing any harm to the tree. We're actually putting less tap holes in the tree because the vacuum will pull from a little larger area in the tree. And that's important because now we've got, instead of having a whole tree that might have 3 or 4 taps on it and 3 or 4 buckets, now it's only got 2 taps on it. And we're drawing similar, if not more, sap out of that same tree, but research is showing that it's not causing any harm or any damage to the tree. The tree, it's actually less invasive than when a branch breaks off the tree. And that happens pretty regularly in the cold weather. So then that sap is collected, and we collect it and turn it into syrup. And this isn't just us, this is just the process. If you don't turn it into syrup within 24 hours or less, it will spoil on you and you can't make syrup out of it. So the quicker you can get it out of the tree and turn it into syrup, the better the quality of the syrup is. And it's just a simple boiling process. We take that sap that may have come out of the tree at 2% sugar content. These again are just natural sugars. We're not adding anything to it. And we boil it until it becomes 66 to 67% sugar. And that's the legal definition of pure maple syrup, is it has to be within that range. Vermont is a little higher standard than the rest of the country. They say it has to be 66.9. The rest of the country says it has to be 66. It's not a higher standard, it's just a different standard. But that's the pure maple syrup on the shelf. And the different colors simply come from the time of season. Early sap, when everything is nice and clean, tends to make lighter colored syrup. Darker colored syrup with sometimes some off flavors comes at the end of the season because the trees are just starting that budding process. The chemistry is changing, and so that tends to go for industrial uses. It's good ingredient syrup because it's got a really strong flavor. I wouldn't put on my pancakes. Some people like it. I'll call that grade A very dark syrup, where the other top 3 grades that you normally will see on the shelf are grade A dark, grade A amber, and sometimes grade A golden. Golden is, people don't seem to like it as much, doesn't have as much flavor, and it's light colored, so it looks like it's thin, like it's watered down. you get complaints sometimes if you sell golden syrup that you watered it down. So we tend to stick with the dark and the amber, and then sell very dark for processing customers.
That's a distant family member has a place now, and they've sectioned it off now, and they have an ice cream place in there. So they do maple ice cream, and they have all the infusions and all that stuff. So they've made it something more than just the bottles on the shelf, and made it like a more year round type business. And it's been fun to go out there and see what they use that for. And that's but I love what you're doing as well, and especially. Let's talk about the business part of things. And obviously we get a lot of people in this podcast that are 5 years in, 3 years in, 10 years into business. I mean, you're a generational business. So let's talk a little bit about running a generational business and how you keep being progressive while also honoring the traditions and what was laid out before you.
There's kind of three aspects to our business, and they don't always fit nicely with each other. The first aspect, and probably, I don't know if it's the most important, but it's pretty important, is the relationship we have with those producers that we buy syrup from. There's more companies popping up all the time that want to buy syrup, and so all of a sudden we've got people, trying to take syrup away from our producers. And the best thing we can do is we treat our producers well. We're honest with them. And we say, hey, we can take your syrup now. We can't take your syrup now. Problem with maple producers is they're like every other farmer. We've made a crop. We've got payments. We need you to pick it up. We need you to pay for it. And so there gets to be we're pretty tight on cash for most of the year. And we start to catch up then in the fall when sales are really picking up and we're maybe not bringing in so much syrup. So that relationship with our producers is very important, and that's generally just me. I take that pretty personally and go out and I visit some of the producers, and when they bring syrup in, I'm here to talk to them about it. I grade the syrup, I mark it accordingly, and so everybody understands why I graded it the way I graded it, and so forth. So we have a lot of pretty loyal producers. Then we've got some that they flip-flop around all the time, but you try to treat them just the same so that they find that hopefully we're treating them better than somebody else is. So that's how we get the syrup.
No, that's awesome. And how about like the challenges in the industry as a whole? Obviously, there's a lot of Canadian influence coming down and purchasing companies in the United States and things like that. I mean, how is navigating the industry today versus like when your father did or when your grandfather did?
Yeah, we were much smaller then, my father and grandfather. So it makes it easier when you're not so big and you don't need to move a certain amount of syrup to keep the doors open. It's a little simpler. They were also farming still at that point, had some cows up until the 50s and doing some other cash cropping. So they had other options to fall back on. Probably in the late 50s, early 60s, is when they made the switch to just maple. And like I said, their challenges weren't as great because they didn't need to move as much syrup to keep things going. So they had a lot of little stores, and a lot of little stores, gift shops and things. Some of them move a lot of syrup, but it's not the same as today where I'm looking at, when I go out, I still appreciate those little stores. We have a lot of little accounts, and I certainly don't treat anybody poorly because they only have one store and they're only going to buy one case of syrup a year to sell in their one little store. But we're really focusing on looking at those larger accounts, trying to get 50, 100, 200,000 store chains. And that's where the competition comes in. So how do we separate ourselves? The biggest thing that we've been doing now for quite a few years is we advertise the Made in the USA. A lot of our competitors are buying syrup from Canada, or they're from Canada themselves. And so we try to advertise that Made in the USA, which gives us that local feel. Even if we're selling in New York State, it's still made in the US, so it feels more local than Canada, even though in New York they might be closer to Canada than they are to us. So that's been our biggest push. And then we always try to tell our story. It's a third generation family, which in our maple industry isn't that unheard of. there's a
Yeah.
lot of 4 and 5 generation families or more too. So, but try to keep that story in front of people and sell that way, because honestly, if everybody's doing a good job with their syrup, you shouldn't notice significant taste differences between brands. So it's all about branding to kind of get people to come back and making that connection. We have, I lost my train of thought.
You're okay. We were going with branding and I can lead you in there. Yeah, it was we were going with branding, and you were talking about how there's not a lot of differences with the products. If everybody's doing it the right way, there shouldn't be too much of a difference. So it really comes down to the marketing and the branding.
Yeah, and we try to do a few things different here, which I think keeps our syrup tasting. So syrup that's made and fresh, the first couple of months of the year after it's been made, it has this fresh flavor. Not everybody notices it, but somebody that's been in the business, you can taste it. And I think consumers can taste it too, but I don't think they know what they're tasting. So we do something here that none of the big companies do, and that is we reboil the syrup before we put it in the bottles. We bring it back to a boil, and what that does is that brings back some of that freshness. So we have customers telling us all the time, hey, your syrup tastes better than everybody else's. Well, does it really, or is it in their head? We think it's because of the extra boiling process. And, we certainly appreciate it when people tell us things like that. But that's an extra step. I think it separates us from the rest. I've had my competitors. We're a small industry. We all know each other. I've had some of them tell me, hey, we don't do that. We know your syrup tastes better, but it's not worth the time.
That's awesome. And like when you speak about branding and partnerships in your community, up in Wisconsin, I saw on your website, you guys partner with in some race car tracks and stuff like that. Talk a little bit about those partnerships. And that's an area I would not expect to see maple syrup company. I love seeing that. Is there a personal connection there, or how did that collaboration come in?
Yeah, so it started out as a joke. Not completely a joke. My cousin and his wife, and then a good friend and his wife, the three of us, we would get together quite regularly. And one day my cousin says to me, why don't you guys sponsor a race car? We were talking about going to race together. We had never been. The other two couples had been to a race, and this was NASCAR. So I thought, well, I just got curious. I'm like, well, how do you get in touch with a team? I have no idea what this is going to cost. So there was ads in eBay at the time, and this was 15 years ago. So I contacted two teams, and one of them got back to me, and the other one said, call me back in a month and I'll have more information for you. And called them back in a month and they didn't answer the phone. So we stuck with this other team. And they just invited us to a race to kind of see what it was all about. And we started with this small team in NASCAR and thought, well, if we get our name on a car, there's lots of grocery stores you see on NASCARs as sponsors. And we didn't really know how that worked, but we thought, well, maybe we'll draw attention to ourselves and we'll get some phone calls and things. And it didn't really work. So we were kind of, after 2 years, we decided, well, this isn't really working. We weren't spending a lot of money. We were just doing a race here and there, and they weren't with quality teams. They were with teams that ran the race, but always finished in the back. And I got a phone call. My wife and I were at the airport on our way home. We got a phone call from a guy, and he says, hey, would you like to come to they have a banquet at the end of every year for the winners. And at the time he was working for Kevin Harvick, who owned his own race team. And I said, well, we're getting on the plane. We're not real interested in going to that. We don't have clothes for a banquet, anything way packed. So we went home, but the conversation evolved, and they had a program that if you sponsored a truck, they would guarantee you a sales to Kroger. So through that program, we picked up Kroger. It cost us a lot of money, but it got us in Kroger, which was the place we wanted to be. And that guy that made that phone call actually became our broker. And he was selling races for teams on the side and then also brokering for us. And we experienced some tremendous growth for about 10 years there. And it had a lot to do with the exposure we were getting with the racing. We were the only maple syrup company. We're the only pure maple syrup company to ever win a race in NASCAR. We won a truck race in 2013 or 12. trying to look at a picture on the wall. I don't see one with a date on it. And that was with Ron Hornaday in the truck series, but Kevin Harvick owned the team that was fielding the truck. And so that was, that was excitement. That got us a lot of notoriety. And then over the years that it started to fade. You go to the retailers, we'd say, hey, put us in your store. We'll put your name on our car. We'll run a race in your market. And then the retailers started, I think things started tightening up. And this was just before COVID. And the retailers said, no, we'd rather you spend money on our programs than outside advertising, because they've got their own in-store programs. And so we were fading away. And our last race was actually right at the beginning of COVID. And we haven't done anything with NASCAR since because of the way the retailers have reacted. We do what you see on our website now is more local racing, more dirt track type things. I've got a good friend that I graduated high school with that runs a local dirt car. He's pretty good. So we sponsor him. And then we have Bill Baylog, who does run the national series with the World of Outlaws sprint cars. He's a Wisconsin guy as well. And so those are our two main things now. But our colors are on the car all year long with those, and those sponsorships are much less money than the NASCAR dollars. And then we use more local. If we've got a retailer that's interested in our product, we'll say, hey, we can put your name on the car and, come down and spend the afternoon with Bill Baylog and watch a race. And so we still do that a little bit. We also have a professional fisherman that we work with, and the buyers love to go fishing with them. So that's a good strategy as well.
That's awesome. I like how you leverage it in multiple ways, and you do the buyer experiences. That's like a lot of my history was in the beer industry, and we did a lot of those experiences with the breweries around the country, or we go to their site, experience their culture, and it went so much farther for how we built the brands on our own home market. So that's awesome. And let's talk a little bit about there's some parts of the maple syrup industry as a whole, as a business, haven't changed, and then some things have. Talk a little bit about kind of some of those business structural evolutions as an industry-wide type conversation.
Probably the biggest thing are the food safety laws and things that are coming into place. So SQF, Safe Quality Foods, as an international, recognized organization or model, I guess maybe is a better word, that that's getting pushed. So anybody that's of any size pretty much has to have that to continue selling to retailers, or especially if it's a food service type item, they want that security. And so what that has done is it's trickled down. There's things that are required of us to maintain that certification, but some of that is based on all of my producers they don't have to have that certification, but they have to have these things in order. We have to have them sign documents every year. We have to go out and it's kind of a lighthearted inspection, but make sure that the place is clean and they're doing what looks to be clean. And then they're required to have any local inspections. So those are probably the biggest thing. The industry is, over the last 25 years, the industry has really cleaned itself up. Some of it on its own, some of it more mandatory. You don't find those places that are out cooking in a backwoods that don't have the pan covered. They're not birds flying around their sugar house. Those kinds of things don't really exist anymore. I mean, they're there, but they're small hobby people that are not trying to sell it on a big scale. And honestly, we can't buy from some of those people that don't have the quality that we need to maintain the qualities on the other end and what's required of us. So those are the things that are probably the most changes, and technology, of course, has helped a lot of that as well. But it's going in the right direction. It's only made our products better across the industry.
And what would you say, as far as that goes too, that maybe, just like farming, in the, let's say, when your dad was running this versus when your grandfather, let's say your grandfather, most likely a majority of the industry was vertically integrated. I mean, they were harvesting their own crops on their own property and then producing it and running it through. And then maybe your dad had a little bit less of those and more, middlemen that were sourcing from multiple places and then producing it and mixing it on in-house, as opposed to today. Do you think, this is me not knowing that answer, has that the number of vertically integrated producers gone down, and most people are kind of sourcing from multiple places, or how is that part of the industry changed and evolved?
So there are still quite a few vertically integrated people. They make their own syrup, they package their own syrup, they sell their own syrup, but most of them also make more syrup than they can sell. So they're also selling to me and or somebody like myself as well. It used to be all that way, and now there are lots and lots of places that's all they want to do is create barrels of syrup and sell them. It's easy. They have a guaranteed sale. They know what they're going to get. It's not quite as profitable, but they don't have to deal with all of the other stuff. They don't have to deal with the bottling. They don't have to deal with the buyers in the stores and getting product out on time and so forth. So, yeah, it's certainly changed. Example, in Wisconsin, 30 years ago, there were probably 5 to 10 people in the state that I would call a big producer. And a big producer is, say, 10,000 taps. Today, a big producer is 30, 50,000 taps. And there are probably 4 times as many people that are that size in the state that there were. And then those 10,000 tap people are now almost considered a hobbyist. It's just production, because of technology, production has gotten better and maybe easier. It maybe doesn't take as many people to run a big operation as it did when my grandfather was doing. We used to hire, I remember as a kid, we would hire 30 men.
I've run the mountain with the buckets, and,
yeah.
And I physically have experienced it for my dad's cousins. Yeah.
So now with the tubing, you still have to do a good job managing your tubing, keeping everything tight, make sure the squirrels didn't chew a hole in you last night, and go clean that stuff up. But you can do that with less people. You may spend just as much time. Somebody's walking the woods all the time, but then there's somebody else managing the sugar house, making the syrup and putting it in the barrels. So it's just the difference.
Absolutely. And anybody who's listening outside, I always try to hit any negative stuff while we're together in the conversation. Anybody, it's like, oh, you just tap all these trees and then you just let them all die. Like maybe a little deeper to like the sustainability process, and how, like you had mentioned subtly earlier, it's less invasive than the tree branching, which could be on a weekly or monthly or annual basis. So talk a little bit about that and make sure anybody that anybody that's listening doesn't think that we're destroying forests or anything.
So there are industry best practices, and of course we can't force people to follow them. Some certifications out there do force them to follow them, but it's not in the producer's best interest not to follow these best practices, because they can do harm to their tree. But it really comes down to the size. You don't want to tap a tree some people will tap an 8-inch diameter tree. That's pretty small. We tend to stick with 10-inch and bigger, and they don't get 2 taps on them until you have trouble reaching around them. You can't touch your hands around the tree, then you can maybe put 2 taps in it. And so now you're talking about putting a 5/16 hole in the tree versus what used to be a 7/16 hole. So you're you're drilling a hole in a tree that's smaller than the damage a woodpecker would do. And that's what you're sucking out of. The industry has studied this for years and years. The only time they see people really doing long-term damage to a tree is when they're over tapping it. They're taking that 6 or 8 inch tree and they're putting a couple taps on it. That's just too much surface area, too much damage to the tree. Those young trees will tend to split a little easier when you drill a hole in them, or a bigger, more stable tree won't do that. But our trees in our land here have been tapped pretty much nonstop since 1928. And my dad tells me this all the time, we have never lost a tree because it was tapped. You lose it because a windstorm goes through. You lose it because it rotted out naturally from the inside. Trees are very resilient that way, and they take care of themselves. They have their own healing process where they'll heal up. That hole won't be visible 2 years from now. Where the 7/16 holes used to take 3 years for them to disappear, the 5/16 holes are impossible to find where they were until you cut them down. You can see a little scarring in the tree. So that's probably the biggest disadvantage to tapping your tree, is it will never make a veneer log. And of course, if you cut it down for veneer, you've also lost all of the possible future income you could have made from tapping that tree. So the long-term outcome is that tree is worth more standing than it is cutting it up for lumber.
That's a really great point. I appreciate you putting it out that way. Let's talk a little, tell everybody as we're closing out here, kind of where to find you, and obviously on the store locator on your site, you guys have a fantastic store locator. So andersonsmaplesyrup.com, and on andersonsmaplesyrup.com there's a store locator for any specific things. But one of the things we try to do in closing, moving forward with these episodes, is we want this to be a networking opportunity for you. So for any of our guests that are listening, and to reach out and connect with you, what types of, in 2024 and beyond, what types of people are you looking to meet? Are you looking to meet more retailers, more distributors? Obviously, general consumers are always welcome, but in specifics of the strategy of your business, are there any specific categories of types of people you would, if they're listening to your podcast and they say, oh man, that sounds awesome, and they all of a sudden you're like, yeah, we're looking for distributors, and then they know to connect with you. So
yeah, we really, anybody that uses pure maple syrup or thinks they can sell some pure maple syrup, there's more and more uses popping up all the time. We'll talk to anybody. But our primary focuses are food service, which is a pretty broad category. That could mean it's used in a restaurant. It could mean that somebody's making cookies with it, or dog food. All kinds of uses out there for it. Retailers, the retail business is probably the largest segment of our business, and of course, it's always good to have more of that. The third thing that is fairly new to us in the last 5-6 years, we've started taking our maple syrup and putting it in a little pouch. I actually have one sitting here. This one is a leakier one. Let's see if I can get it in the right spot.
Nice.
So it's for athletes. It's just pure maple syrup, but naturally the nutrition in pure maple syrup is similar to what these artificial goo and gel packets are out there that marathon runners are taking. They need that extra energy to finish the marathon or long-term workouts. And so pure maple syrup does that. And we always tell people, if you can't use it in your workout, just put it in your coffee or on your pancakes the next morning. We didn't add anything to it. It's the same product. So that type of business that's maybe looking to sell a nutritional product like that, maple syrup fits right into that. And even it's even come up with talks with firefighters and so forth. They need that little energy, and it's natural and healthier for them.
Yeah, I think I did not catch that on the website, so I'm going to off the record here. I want to tell you that my light bulb just went up there as soon as you showed me that. So we're going to be having a conversation outside of this episode about that, and introduce you to some people, because I think that is a differentiating SKU right there. I'm looking at it right now on your website. That's awesome.
Oh, good, thank you.
Where is that product currently? Is that product currently sold in grocery stores, or are you seeing it?
Yeah. So we've focused our marketing efforts on that towards marathons. So, and more regionally here in the Midwest, Grandma's Marathon, Twin Cities Marathon, some of the big marathons that are here in the Midwest, some bike races. And we've been doing a lot of, guerrilla marketing. We set up a booth and sell it and talk about it at those events. We have a few small bike shops, running stores that carry it. But primarily it's Amazon. Amazon's our biggest seller of that product right now.
We're definitely gonna be talking. I have a few. I have some outdoor shops and bike shops and things like that I'm putting some other products in, and this is a completely complementary item to what these people are looking for. So yeah, I'll set up a discovery meeting with you and have some detailed conversation with that. So, and yeah, in closing, I'm excited now. I'm really excited because I always look for, while we're talking about, there's always a way that we're going to be able to work together and be able to help your business, because it's more than just a podcast that we're doing. We're trying to build a network. We're trying to grow sustainable businesses together in a larger community. So it's not just a one-off type of advertising opportunity. We really want to proactively build our guests' businesses and help connect them to the right people. So I appreciate you taking the time today, Steve. I also appreciate you reaching out outside of the fact that that email account was dead, and I appreciate you proactively getting onto this other one. And I really, that's a testament to you and your personality. And in addition to that, just hopping on cold and knowing, because that's what it is. It's I get people on. We've never met personally. We've emailed a couple times over the past year, but never met in person. So I just have to remind everybody as they're listening that this is a genuine human connection. We have not shaken hands. We've not hugged. We've not shared a pancake dinner together. And we just really, are connecting on this and finding different ways. I did not have any questions queued up. I'm feeding off of you and feeding off of my experience and building that human connection with each other. So I appreciate you taking the time and taking the chance today. And I look forward to a lot more conversations with you, Steve.
Wonderful. Thank you for the time.
Excellent. And I'll send you an email here this week, looking to do a discovery meeting, and we'll talk about the fuel, because that's a home run right there.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, take care, Steve. You enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
If you have a story to share, or you know someone with an inspiring journey, the Freemind Podcast wants to hear from you. Submit your story or nominate somebody to be our next guest. Check out our website, thefreemindpodcast.com, and be a part of the conversation that truly matters.